Actually, thank you to you, FFWD, for having invited me to this Global Foresight Summit. And I don't know, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever your time zone may be. Today, I would like to talk about policy making in post-normal times. But before getting into that, what I would like to do is make first a previous comment. You see, I do believe that this COVID-19 crisis we are experiencing is a full-blown post-normal situation. I do believe it so much that with some colleagues at the center, Christopher Jones and Liam Mayo, we are calling it the post-normal perfect storm. And because precisely of this post-normal nature, being so complex, contradictory, chaotic, changing so fast, expanding so much, escalating impacts and simultaneous occurrence, the outcome, the result is that we are very uncertain of what will happen. Yes, we can rely on past experience for certain things. We have another pandemics before, and we know that certain measures can work better than others. Likewise, we have also dealt with economic crisis, and we also know that there are things that will help and others that won't. Similarly, we can also think of past catastrophes, disasters, and we have also developed some knowledge regarding how to best help people. But if we look at the big picture, the whole of it, we have to admit that there's a great deal of uncertainty that we have to deal with. Of course, there are places that seems to be doing better than others, but when we look at the mid-long-term range, things beginning to be a lot more unclear. So what I'm going to do next is I will elaborate on a previous presentation that I did last year in Barcelona. And I will do it for two reasons. The first one is because all what I said then is even more relevant now. And second, because what we are going through, what I'm learning from this has helped me to develop, to include new elements in that presentation. So, policy making in post-normal times. I will make three challenging statements. The first one is that the problems of the present are unsolvable. Let me say it another way. The present problems do not have a solution. I will develop later. If we analyze what are the elements of any policy, we can summarize it in three main aspects. The first one is the object, being it the situation, the fact, or the condition upon which we want to exert some influence that we want to affect. It can also be a deficit or a problem that we need to address or somehow resolve. But it can also be a good, something worthy, something valuable that we want to preserve or protect, the object. Then we have the action that relates to the how do we do the measures to attain our goals. This means that we need to address a very important element in any policy, the theory of change, the element that let us know if the measures we want to implement will lead us to the objectives, to the goals we have set. Traditionally, there have been two main approaches to deal with this theory of change. You can set for an expert approach and tap on the best available knowledge or the top experts in the field and let them assess you, tell you how best move on. Second one, that is not really excluded, is a participatory approach. You gather all the parties involved, all the stakeholders, and collectively try to decide what could be the best way to move on. Object, action, and then the main part, or the most relevant, the outcome. What you expect to achieve, to attain with your policy. And this outcome must be measurable somehow. You need to be able to determine if you have achieved it or not. You need to be able to evaluate the performance of that policy. Sorry for my voice. This confinement is resulting to be a lot more talkative than I expected, and I'm beginning to feel it. Okay, let's go back to the object. The thing with the object, is that it's the most susceptible element to the action of public opinion or public perception. And that takes me to my second challenging statement. Political participation doesn't work. If you want, political participation doesn't work anymore. And why is it so? First of all, because, let's face it, our democratic regimes are beginning to be a little bit old. We are basically applying the 18th century version of models developed in the 17th century, and it is no wonder that it's getting old-fashioned, sometimes directly anachronic. So some people do not relate to manners, forms of participation that might work very well in the 19th century, but certainly do not work so well in the 21st. And thus we see how so many politicians sometimes behave more as if they could be in a reality show than in a true theoretical debate. The other thing is that nowadays, most of participation exercise tend to be dominated by two kinds of people: the most polarized and or the most reactive. People that are really heated and they feel strongly about whatever it is being debated. And these kind of people many times tend to exclude the other kinds of participants. So participation is not really working as it should. Let's move on to the action, to that theory of change I was referring to. You see, the problem is that we're still relying on theory of change that may have worked well for normal situations, with a more linear development, with a more proportionate relation between inputs and outputs, with a more clear direction. This is not anymore the case. Nowadays, we are more and more, let's say, facing contradictory and paradoxical situations. And these kind of situations call politicians into lying. Because even if they mean well, and I'm not that naive, I know that some of them are very comfortable with lying, but let's face on those politicians that still want to best serve the interests of their constituency, that they want to do what is best for them. Nowadays, it happens quite often that they end up doing precisely the opposite thing to what they claim they would never do, because that is the nature of postnormal phenomena. So let's go back to my first statement. The problems of the present do not have a solution. I really cheated, because I should have said the problems of the present do not have a solution in the present or even in the future. Why is it so? Let's think for a minute. What do we do when we need to solve something? Typically, the first thing we will do is gather data, process them, try to generate some knowledge, design some possible solutions, ideally test them, and then implement them. Even if we go very fast, this takes time. During which the situation we are trying to address will have evolved. Very frequently it happens that even when we try to anticipate this evolution, we fall short. And as a result, we are always 1 or 2 steps behind the situation we are trying to address. So no, the problems of the present do not have a solution in the present. And it is kind of fool to try to do it this way. What we can and we should do in the present is start facing the future challenges. We need to look at what is coming next Even, of course, right now we have to concentrate on saving people, saving lives, but we have to start considering what is coming next and what we should do about it. So if one of the problems is participation, then we need to change participation. What I'm proposing here is what I call a Prothean participation. Prothean as in the Greek god Protheus, a god that could change his appearance. Nowadays, in superhero times, we would say a shape shifter. So we need to have a participation that at least complies with three conditions. First of all, it must be a participation that is able to expand not only horizontally, we like to engage with our peers, but also vertically. You see, this kind of postnormal situation do affect all kinds of society strata, and we need to bring them in. How? With a second condition. But by making this participation multiple. Multi-mode, multi-channel, multi-platform, multi-whatever. If some of us are okay with this kind of electronic digital interaction, let's carry on, by all means. But what about the folks that prefer face-to-face? What about the people that rely more in a more reflexive reading, writing interaction? Well, all these kinds of participation must be brought in on an equal footing because they all are required. We cannot get out of this situation leaving some part of society behind. And finally, we need to make this participation flexible and adaptable, both in temporal and in spatial terms. For instance, why don't we can just focus directly, personally, in the issues that we are interested the most or that we feel we can make the most significant impact. And we can delegate the other subjects into some kind of representatives. Not the same kind of representatives we have now, that we just cast a vote and it's like signing a white check to someone to do whatever they please. No, it could be a much more accountable representation, a representation we can track. But also, what about if I only focus in the subjects of my neighborhood, of my town, because I really like to be involved, but I don't feel I can be a meaningful participant in national or international events. All these kind of levels of temporal and spatial participation can be easily modulated today. That's not really a technical challenge anymore. It's a cultural problem. So we need really to improve participation. Why? Because, and this is maybe the main lesson I'm getting from this COVID-19 crisis, is that we need to develop a new kind of community. You see, despite being confined for almost 4 weeks already, I'm reaching out more than ever. This is like the 6th conference I'm participating this week, interviews, chats. We are trying to reach out. We are trying to build community despite the physical distance. And I think it's because we are beginning to understand that either all of us, or at least, at the very least, most of us make it through, or we are all going down with this ship. So participation for new communities. And then, because this is a post-normal situation and we are trying to design policies for post-normal situations, we need to bring into a strong sense of visioning. This is probably the thing we are sure the most at the center. In the few experiments that we have done, visioning, it's revealing itself to be a key element. And it makes sense, because if we keep saying that you cannot control, let alone manage post-normal situations, the only thing you can really do is to navigate them. But the most important element in navigation is setting course. You need to know where you want to go. And you cannot decide this course just a few of us. We need to engage all of us. Therefore, the need of what I call a dialectic visioning. A visioning that goes beyond the mere stating everybody's preferences. This is not like going to visit Santa and letting him know what do you want for Christmas. You need to understand that what you want, that your preferred future, may contradict someone else's future or preclude them. So therefore, some kind of negotiation must be involved here. We need to find a visioning that somehow transcends and integrates all these individual and collective preferences into something that is far more robust and really capable of setting the course we need to get through this postnormal perfect storm. And that requires also a new kind of leadership. In my previous presentation, I talked about critical honesty. You see, we need leaders that tell us what we need to hear, not what we want to hear. And I get it. In this postnormal, so uncertain times, very simple, straight to the point, easy messages are so appealing. We want to believe that if someone says, I will get you through this, he or she will be able to do it. Well, even if he means well, he will be lying, as I have already said. So we need someone to be able to admit that if he or she doesn't know, he doesn't know. If he or she is doubtful, is doubtful. But this requires of the second element that I'm developing right now because of what I'm experiencing with this crisis. This honesty is not enough if it is not coupled with what I'm calling a humble courage. We need more courage. As I said, the courage to admit when you don't know. So leaders should be courageous enough to let us know that they don't have a clue if they don't. But this is a double-edged courage, because then we are also need to be able to take it. This courage goes both ways. They have to be honest, but then we have to be able to accept the truth and react accordingly, and don't expect them to come up with miracle solutions that maybe they are not really available. So, in short, what I'm proposing for is to up our game, and to do it by, first of all, improve participation systems by this Prothean Participation. That would be my proposal. To use it to develop new visions through this kind of dialectic visioning I'm proposing, but I'm open for better ideas. And collectively, both leaders and citizens be more humble and courageous about what is happening. Because you see, I was so disappointed with the last crisis because I felt we were missing the opportunity to start implementing some much needed changes. But I think that this time we are already being forced to change certain aspects. Some people is longing to go back normal, and forgive me for fact normal. We need to come up with something new. And I believe that these modest proposals I'm making can help us to make it through. Thank you very much. And now I will be really happy to listen to your questions. Oh, I already have a couple of them. The first one is, there are no slides. I guess it's pretty obvious by now. Okay, there's a second question. If democracy doesn't work anymore, what about participatory autocracy for PNT? Well, that's a tough question. You see, I haven't really said that democracy doesn't work anymore. I've said that the kind of liberal democracy we are using right now is showing evident signs that may need a serious update. I think that right now, the idea of some kind of autocracy seems appealing. So we are seeing how China seems to do better in the treatment of the crisis, and many people long for a more, let's say, strong leadership that tell us what to do and somehow delivers. I'm not sure this is really a recipe for the long term. I think that in times of uncertainty, we are eager to accept certain things that in the long term we may not. And that's precisely why I'm saying we need to think at the long term. We cannot get too caught in the present situation. We cannot let the present situation become the elephant, or as we say, the black elephant that prevents us from seeing anything else. Okay, where do you think Africa can start from? Wow. Well, I think that one thing they can do is they don't need to follow our example in the things that clearly haven't worked. And this idea that development should follow a preordained pattern, and whoever is a little later in the line should follow the same steps, it's quite frankly quite ridiculous. And it's just as how put it the secretary of the World Organization, the hangover from a colonialist mindset. I think that they need to find their own solutions. The problem is most of them, for instance, they do not have very robust health systems. They cannot rely on the health system to treat the pandemics once the pandemics is in their place. So they need to develop alternative situations. Many countries, what they are doing is really trying to secure the borders so as to prevent the virus from getting in, because once the virus is in, it may be difficult for them to get it. But they need to find their own solutions. It may be that in many places confinement is not really a viable option. But again, I would be a little bit uncomfortable to let them know what they should do. How to make post-normal policies in normal governance mode? What are the leverage to get post-normal policies put into action? Well, that's the thing. I think that what we are watching is that normal policies do not really work in post-normal situations. I mean, I'm focusing, for instance, in the example of Spain. The management of the crisis is between poor and appalling. And I don't know if they want to preserve more the economy, or sometimes it feels that then they want to save people. And by trying to attain so many things in such a hesitant manner, we are losing both. So I think that it's something that I cannot really say for sure, but it must come from both the, let's say, the realization from the government side and from the citizenship side. So I think exercise like this one, engaging with other peoples, and well, you may disagree with me, you may propose alternative options, but the thing is that surely we all agree that the present structure, the present system are not working, or are not working well enough. Well, so let's take this major shock as an opportunity to improve or change them. Okay, to develop a new form of governance will take time. How much in your perspective? Well, this is the thing. I don't know how much of this present situation can really carry on, but how much has your life changed in the past 2-3 weeks? Mine has changed a lot. I mean, the way I approach my work, my teaching, and my interaction has changed a lot. The kind of city, I live in Barcelona, the kind of city I'm experiencing is totally different. There are parts of this new situation that I would like to keep. And I think that if we develop enough consensus, we will. You see, this is the thing about saying that crises are opportunities. They shake the situation so much that they really make a lot easier for big changes to happen. The push of the old normal to go back, it's going to be enormous, huge, very strong, because also all of us up to a point we are missing the old normal. But once we think a little bit about it and we realize that the old normal is what got us into this situation, it's when we realize that certain things need to happen. So I think that probably once the worst of the pandemic begins to fade, there will be like a strong pendulum move to go back to normal. But hopefully we will be able to retain parts of the new actual current situation and start developing the changes we need. Okay. How to build the kind of vision you talk about? Well, this is the thing. The only thing I'm proposing is let's say, a methodological approach. So I know it can be done in not very big groups, as we have done in several places. The larger the group, the more tricky the process will be. But the same way that, for instance, the people of FFWD have managed to gather a few thousands of people in this summit, this can be worked out. What I'm really emphasizing, that for many years, we kind of been telling people that they couldn't really be engaging in building the future if they were not experts in the future. This, if you excuse me, is a pile of bullshit. Everybody knows the kind of future he or she would like. Everybody have a more or less clear idea of what we would like to attain. The thing is to understand the trade-off of these preferences, the cost, the advantages, the benefits, and how our preference, or even our group community preference, relate to other preference. Because as I said, I don't think that this is that kind of situation where the winner takes it all or the first one takes the prize. I think we really need to find a way to get, if not all of us, as many of us in this. So I don't really can answer the how. I'm just merely stating that it cannot just be what I would like is this. It has to be what I would like that includes an understanding of the cost, the benefits, the trade-off, and the implications of our preferences. Okay. Have you seen any good example of governments piloting participation platforms that could enable this kind of visioning you're talking about? Also, what is the role of big data and artificial intelligence in enabling for disabling participation? Well, I think, for instance, and forgive me if I say the wrong country, I think it's Latvia. The country is really pushing forward for this electronic citizenship. Finland is also doing interesting things. Some tech small countries, Singapore and South Korea, I'm just talking by memory, I may be wrong, are trying to implement this kind of different channels. You see, I'm not against using big data and artificial intelligence, but this is not a neutral tool. We are learning that many times the algorithms and the coding behind this big data or artificial intelligence initiatives have, let's say, hidden agendas. So if we are able to be open about them, okay, I mean, it could be fully, it could be fool not to use it if they can help. I think that we just need to be cautious. We cannot be naive. We cannot be like new generation Luddites and prevent development from happen. I mean, even if I am not sure that this Zoom platform is giving me some security problems with my staff, it is just wonderful that I can use it to reach all of you. So just let's not be naive. Be open. One thing I've been trying to learn more about it, and I think it's very interesting, is collectives like the We Share people are promoting the beta philosophy or the beta testing movement. What they say is that let's try to put together like prototypes that are good enough so we can see if they work, but if they don't work completely well, they are easy to reform, to edit, to improve. And if they don't work at all, we can get them away without feeling so attached to them. I think it's high time for doing a lot of beta testing. I don't think what may work in one place has to work everywhere. This whole idea of one size fits all is dumb. And as I said, I think, notice that what I was trying to say about all these conditions for participation is that diversity has to be taken to the forefront. It has not something that has to be tolerated. It has to be something that is actively promoted and celebrated. Okay, another one. We have democracy in Finland and COVID-19 situation is well handled by our young female leader. Prime Minister Sanna Marin, 34 years, lead government. Do you see some difference in male leadership and female leadership? Oh, I love this question. Yes, I do, very much. Actually, I'm so appalled by this kind of all male or heteropatriarchal approach, taking out the soldiers, bringing up the militaries to deliver the speeches. For goodness sake, you cannot shoot down a virus. Come on. So yes, I think that in those places, and okay, Finland is smaller place, not that much population, probably more cohesionate than in other places. But in some places where they are really trying to move forward, it's not that the government is young. If I am not wrong, it is a 5 parties coalition, which is, here we have 2 parties in Spain and they don't seem to understand each other. So that in a place of 5 coalition parties is moving on, is not just a shine example for the rest of the world. It proves that we need to really embrace, follow, and pay more careful attention to this neglected half of the world, women, because I mean, in many places, they are really the ones that are holding the whole thing together. Even in Spain, most of the health system is a female system. It's most of them are women, and probably we are better off because of that. So yes, I totally agree with you, Elena. Next, considering the tools present today and in development, couldn't we already start reinventing and creating a new way of governing, starting off with identifying the most issues together? What is stopping us? What do we need to give attention to? Well, actually, this is one of the questions we are really struggling to answer. Part of the problem is the notion of normal. That is why so much against it. You see, normal becomes a very toxic idea when thinking of the future. I usually have this exercise with my students, my undergraduate students. I ask them what normal is, and they start by referring to some sort of statistical approach. The most frequent, the average, the median, whatever. Very soon, though, they begin to realize that there's some sort of social construction. So whatever is backed up by habits, by tradition, begins to be more normal. In some cases, we've even seen that this construction is sanctioned, is backed up by some institutions with authority, academia, the law, the church, whatever. So for instance, in many places, there's a right kind of family. And the right kind of family is sanctioned in laws and all sorts of official documents. But the problem with normal is if you want to push for something different and it gets labeled as abnormal, it makes it a lot harder to discuss about it. So I would start by getting rid of normal, normalcy, and what on, and then let's see what we can do. Of course, normal is also the way of the status quo to protect themselves, to shadow themselves. They don't need to defend themselves if they are normal. I mean, it's like the biggest trick of the devil is making us believe that he doesn't exist. So if this normal becomes a curtain to hide status quos that we want to change, it gets a little bit harder. But you know, again, this major shock, what was normal 4 weeks ago, it's so different what we are experiencing right now. In so many aspects, I could really get used to this new lifestyle. I also long for other things. So I think that one way to start is that by being all of us more aware of the new situation, realize the challenge, and then begin to think what are the really essential things that need to be done. We are also, at some point, we may have to accept that in order to save the future, we will have to sacrifice part of the present. And maybe aspects of our just up to 4 weeks present lifestyle will have to be given up. But if that's to have a future worth a name, I think it's not a bad trade-off. Another one, how can a community step up in finding solution, assuming if the leaders humbly admit of not knowing solution? Mastering subject, where to start? Well, you see, one thing we are discovering, when we started pushing this post-normal times theory, one thing that was concerning us is that we didn't want to be too elitistic so as to just remain in the ivory tower, pretending that we are the enlightened ones and trying to shed some light over the rest. So we're really trying to use this as a tool to empower not only people, but mostly communities. So we need to find ways to widespread, to distribute this empowerment. So for instance, another field I'm working with is social economy. Social economy may not have all the answers, but it certainly shows that there are alternatives to the current hegemonic capitalistic model. So for instance, in any social economy, firm, company, cooperative, whatever, there's a very strong principle, equity. So everybody has an equal saying. And in huge cooperatives, and some of them have thousands of members, participation becomes tricky, but it can be done. They prove that it can be done. And when they take decisions, they are much robust. Also, they don't believe in redistribution, because redistribution entails that distribution has failed in the first place. So we need to work for distribution. So again, I mean, there's no first class and second class categories in getting through this situation. It has to be one global class, and we need to make sure we are not leaving many people behind, because that will only signal that we are not making it right. And then next crisis is going to be even worse. So actually, I'm not claiming I have all the answers. That's why I accepted to do this, because I really think that any of you may have a better answer to this than mine, and hopefully together we can find it. Maybe we need post-normal governments. Well, Martin, you're talking to a guy that many years ago wrote a paper called Post-Normal Governance. I'm more in favor of post-normal, of governance than governments. I think that's the problem with the normal situation. We just rely too much on the government, and the government somehow has forgotten that a government, it's nothing without the citizens, and if you want the economic sector. So it has to be an ecology of all the elements, and yes, I think it has to be post-normal governance. But you see, don't get me wrong, please. Post-normal is not about telling us how it should be the next step. Post-normal is about trying to help us to make sense of this huge transition we are moving through. It's not just the present COVID-19. This has been going on for quite some time. This sense that we are approaching some sort of huge systemic transition, it's well felt by many people. Zygmunt Bauman talk of liquid times, Byung-Chan talk about the burnout society, Adam Curtis talks about hypernormalization, Susanna Zuboff talks about surveillance capitalism, we have the Anthropocene, Donna Haraway talks about the Cthulhucene. So this idea that we are going through a major change, it's shared. So post-normal is about understanding that because we are going through this period of deep systemic change, things will behave in different manners, but we do not claim to know what should be the next step. We are beginning to play with the idea of transnormality. Ziauddin Sardar coined it. So a new normality that somehow is able to get what we think it's worth preserving from this old system, what we may learn from the transition period, and what we need to develop for the new situation. Okay. In many parts of the world, citizens only know army rule, absolute monarchies, presidential dictatorship of very flawed democratic systems. Where and how are the new humble and self-critical leaders going to come from? Well, certainly not from the ones that are already in charge, although some of them seem to be a little bit more aware than others of the kind of leadership that may be required. You see, and again, this takes me to why do I think this is an opportunity. The shock is so big that in many cases we all see that the emperor is naked, despite they may claim that they are doing their best and we are moving forward and together we shall overcome, and these kind of things that maybe we need to reinforce the positive, but please don't bullshit us. But the other thing we know is that change never comes from the center of the system. It always comes from the periphery. And I wonder that up to a point we are also the periphery right now. So we are also need to push for this. Ashish Nandi, which is a well-known Indian philosopher and critical thinker, he spent many times studying colonialism. And one of the things he concluded is that the future is the only fight left worth fighting for. And I couldn't agree more. So it's at the end up to us. We may be the not so empowered ones. We may be not the very aware ones, but we have the numbers. So the more we share this message and the more it will ring, because it rings through what I'm saying, I would believe. The more it rings through to other people, well, the more likely we will be able to move on. Wow. Is the integration of human collective intelligence into our digital infrastructure and governing architecture the most post-normal challenge ahead? Wow. You see, certainly the kind of context brought by ICT, internet, this new sort of noosphere we are building, it seems like at least a sensible place to start with. And even more now that who knows for how long we will be prevented from physically meeting and from traveling. By the way, I'm so happy I don't have to travel that much lately. But so in a part, I would say yes. I cannot know for sure. It may be just be the first step and we need to move on. But it seems a good place, if not a logical place to start. Okay, your proposal about the new democracy that works in vertical and horizontal level and size doesn't need universalization of internet or disruptive technologies to function. Well, again, let's not be disturbed by the gadgets. Now it seems that if you don't have high technology, you are doomed. But you see, one of the best examples ever of, let's say, future-oriented participatory democracy I know, it was done in the 80s, if I am not wrong, in Hawaii Islands, in the state that ran a consultation, and the technology they used was people phoning to answering machines to deliver their opinions, the takings, the messages. So we cannot build technology to become the new barrier. It's like, I don't know in your country, but one of the mistakes that we made in Spain when we began to introduce computers in the doctors' offices is that they put the screens in between the doctor, the physician, the GP, and the patient. So most folks, particularly older ones, thought that that new technology was only further alienating them. So luckily, I think that there's people far more creative and innovative out there than me, and there are wonderful things that can be done with low tech. I mean, radio still works very well in many places of the world. These days, I try to listen to the radio as much as possible. So everything doesn't have to be internet, but of course, that doesn't deny that if we have a robust, true global internet as the World Wide Web, as it was dreamt at one point, that would help a lot, indeed. How do you support the people, policymaker, personal transportation? You see, this is a critical thing, because we cannot expect politicians to assume a superhuman attitude to do whatever needs to be done despite the cost. So nowadays, one of the biggest problems of our democratic systems is that it makes it very hard the long-term thinking, because every 4 or 5 years there are elections, nowadays shorter than that, and it's like whatever can happen after the next election is like utopia, far future. You cannot ask politicians to engage in long-term thinking if people are not gonna vote them if they have not done things for the short term. That's the same thing I was meaning by this double-edged, two sides courage. You cannot ask politicians to be able to do certain things if we are not collectively being able to take it. That's the thing. So it cannot be just a bottom up or a top down. It has to be both. And somehow we have to be we have to manage meeting in the middle. Okay, you have said that in post-normal times you would propose to push for more participation and more inputs from citizens for citizenship for problem-solving solution. However, as it is already difficult to engage citizenship in normal times, I am referring to participatory processes, Barcelona, Porto Alegre, how would you propose to engage in an efficient manner in a post-normal crisis time? Well, that's a very fair question. And I think that to apply my own recipe, I have to admit I don't really know. I think we must. The problem is some of I know a little of this participatory process. For instance, in Barcelona and other places near here, I've been evaluating participatory process, and the problem is that sometimes the people, they don't see that participatory process as really relevant. Sometimes they just feel that they are complying with some legal requirement, or they are becoming just a part in a public relations operation. So I think that when participation really rings true, there's something that helps. And secondly, I mean, there's little reward in normal participatory processes, because you may engage in a big participatory process, and then for whatever reason, because a big company, a decision of another government, all that outcome goes to the trash can. So I think that we really need to understand what are the pitfalls, the shortcomings of present participatory programs, and there are people that are far more knowledgeable here than me. Learn as many lessons from there, try to understand what we are aiming for. Maybe, I mean, we can rely on despite I'm not fully sold, but maybe it could help to rely on some sort of, I don't know, a big data or artificial intelligence. I mean, some of you may not know it, but nowadays there are local councils and regions, they are buying data to Twitter, for instance, and with the data they buy, they know if the citizenship are happy or unhappy, and they can even sometimes know which are the things that concern them. So this is not the thing I would really would advocate for, but if there are ways to do it, and in Barcelona, for instance, there's that very interesting initiative, Ideas for Change, that they are trying to see how we can use all this technology for the good of the citizenship. So it's really not a question I can fully answer, but I think that there are lines that seem more promising than others. Thank you very much. It has been really a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to new summits in the future, not necessarily in confined times, please.